we could I want to call the meeting to order and thank all of you who've come in on a Monday to be with us. I want to thank the senior senator from Tennessee for asking me to moderate this and say that it'll probably be 4 or 5 years before I actually hit a gavel on a wood block again, but maybe even later, but thank you for letting me do that today. We are glad to have a distinguished panel here at a time when our country is focused on energy issues. I know in the state of Tennessee, gasoline is approaching $4 a gallon. I know that on the Senate floor today, we're going to begin discussing legislation regarding climate security. And I can't think of a better time to be talking about the technologies that you represent. I actually think that we have a tremendous opportunity in our country right now with so many people feeling vulnerable on one hand as it relates to energy, and then on the other hand, so many having a passion to deal with climate change, to really bring together two groups that in the past have not worked particularly well together, to really shape legislation for our country in a way that's responsible and takes our country into the future in an appropriate manner. And we are very fortunate to have each of you here today. I would like to go ahead and introduce you and say who you are, and then give each of the senators a moment just to address you and to address this audience, and then we'll move on to your testimony. But we're very fortunate to have Dr. Rhone Resch, President of the Solar Energy Industries Association. We thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Kelly Tiller from Tennessee. We're certainly fortunate to have you here today, and thank you. Dr. Scott Tinker, who's Director of Development of Economic Geology at the University of Texas, Austin. We have Dr. Howard Grunspecht, who's Deputy Administrator for EIA. Thank you so much for coming. And Mr. Keith Cole, who's the Director of Advanced Technology Vehicle Strategies with General Motors. Again, I want to thank Senator Alexander and the conference for organizing these most useful hearings at a time that could not be more appropriate. And with that, I'd like to turn to our distinguished colleagues, Senator Bennett and Senator Bond, and then Senator Alexander for any opening comments they might have.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate your being aggressive enough to organize this, and Senator Alexander's overall leadership in it, and the wisdom of Senator Bond from a longer perspective than the rest of us. I would simply like to frame it. I don't have a chart up here like everybody else has. I have a stack here, but they're all too small to show. But if I could just frame it in these terms, we're seeing our energy demands go up in an ever-increasing trend, and we now are seeing an attempt to turn that trend down in terms of supply. That is, people saying, well, the energy needs are going up, but we've got to cut down on the amount of fossil fuels we use, particularly coal, which happens to be the cheapest and the most accessible, and they have the energy available in the greatest quantity. But we also want to turn down use of oil, and we are discovering that as we move away from coal and oil into natural gas, the price goes up dramatically, so we want to do something to hold down the pressure on natural gas. Well, even if we were to level our use of fossil fuels from our present position, not to turn it down, the increase in need is going to create a delta from where we are now. The need is going to go up. The projections are something like 30% higher than it is right now in the next, 10, 20 years. Something's got to fill that delta. And if in the name of global warming, we not only level it out, we bring it down, the delta is going to get that much bigger. And we have to deal with the challenge of filling that delta. Now, this is not the place to get into the technical challenges of global warming worldwide. We recognize that if the United States met every one of the goals that have been laid out for it in some recent legislative proposals, the impact worldwide would be very small, because the rest of the world is adding to the demand for energy much faster than we are. So that's another subject for another place. But let's at least start out this conversation by talking about ways in which we can effectively fill the delta created by the pressure to lower our usage of fossil fuels at the same time the demand for increased energy is increasing fairly dramatically. That's the challenge we face, and I think the panel of witnesses will help us understand it a good deal better, and I'm grateful to all of you for your willingness to show up.
You for your leadership, and Senator Bond, who's been so involved in this issue and will lend a great deal to this debate as we go forward.
Thank you very much, Senator Corker, for chairing this hearing. We just wanted to give you a little experience and hope it whets your appetite. With the average price of gas around $4 a gallon, it's no question that energy, and especially gas and diesel, are on the minds of everybody in America. I just came back from a tour across the state of Missouri over the recess, listening to people talking about the pain at the pump, what it's doing to them, and I think everyone agrees that we have to get real about our energy future. And part of what we're doing today is talking about, let's get real about it. What we need, how we make it cleaner, what we can do. American families are facing real pain at the pump, and they want to know how we got into this. It's not just the families, it's farmers, it's businessmen. Two times I stopped at major truck stops, and truckers are going out of business. The people who deliver the goods that we need on a daily basis are saying, $4.75 was a diesel price in Joplin, outside some of our major trucking operations, and they can't deliver. They can't stay in business. So what I think everybody understands is this is a basic supply and demand problem. It's economics 101. We need comprehensive action that not only reduces demand through more efficiency and conservation, but also more supply, particularly through opening up new sources of oil and gas, fossil fuels, and using other fuels available right here in America. And we need to do so in the most environmentally friendly way possible. Now, I've joined my Republican colleagues in supporting the American Energy Production Act of 2008 to tap the U.S. domestic supplies right here at home, off our shores, under our mountains, and in our fields. A lot of people are stunned when they hear that we're begging OPEC and Saudi Arabia to produce more oil. And we have, I understand, 7 times the reserve of oil in the shale in the Rocky Mountains that Saudi Arabia has. And we're going hat in hand to them. I can tell you that my tour throughout Missouri showed that our state is already hard at work on a host of clean energy solutions to use less energy, more friendly energy, and capture carbon. We have a carbon sequestration project for which I got an earmark on 4 years ago at Springfield, Missouri. City Utilities working with Missouri State University and the Missouri University of Science and Technology to see if we can capture carbon a half-mile deep in the geological formation. We have scientists seeking to maximize corn and soy harvest for more ethanol and biodiesel production. I had a very, very fascinating discussion with the scientists at the Danforth Plant Science Center. They were talking about adding carbon dioxide to that they would take off of a coal processing operation to algae and exposing it to sunlight to create biodiesel at no net carbon increase, since they were using recycled carbon. And they were talking about cellulosic ethanol. We have vast forests in Missouri that are overcrowded and need to be thinned. Latest information I had from the National Forest Service, from the Missouri Conservation Department, the Missouri University Forestry Department, was that in one area we looked at, 4,200 tons of low-value, small-diameter wood that must be cleaned out of the forest, and we hopefully can turn that into ethanol. The problem was, when I asked the scientists, how far are we from developing an economically feasible means of converting wood to ethanol? They told me we're not there yet. We're still working on it, but we're not there. The scary thing is Congress, in our, quote, wisdom, has mandated that by 2022 we produce 16 billion gallons of cellulosic ethanol. We don't have the technology. That's a problem. And we also, Missouri happening to be the battery capital of the nation, because we had 90% of the lead, which we have to mine because it's in Missouri. We're the battery leaders, but we're working on new battery techniques and even potentially a polymer lithium-ion battery that can not only support the hybrid cars, and I would urge our auto manufacturers to work on a joint venture consortium to develop a source of those batteries in the United States, so that we don't have to depend upon our Japanese friends to provide the batteries. We have lots of things going on in Missouri. We want to supersize that success. I think it's critical that our nation make the needed investments in clean energy technologies today. And I will add, as my own personal footnote, a cap-and-trade system without the technology is just a massive tax increase. We need to get the technologies right and get it right quickly. Our families who want cleaner energy but are squeezed by the prices at the pump need more and cleaner energy and fossil fuels, which we're not going to be able to get rid of, as my colleague from Utah has said. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. When energy is being discussed, there are some people who just preempt the order, whatever it might have been, and one of those is Senator Pete Domenici, and at this time we'd love for him to have any opening comments.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if there are other senators, I would rather they speak, and I would wait till last, or perhaps even after a witness. I'd just like to get the feel of things. I do want to thank you and Senator Alexander for what we're doing here and what we did last week. I think we're finally getting the right message and the right issues to the American people. I will make just one observation. I hear and see different people on television talking about the price of gasoline, and they're involved in the details of how is the price set, who does this, who does that. I tell you what we need. We need somebody to tell the American people that the United States of America can produce a great deal of the energy that we are now importing if we will just decide that it is the highest American priority, the first and highest priority, to produce energy where energy exists. That is not the policy of the United States. For instance, deep coastal drilling off the coast of America. Every expert will tell you that that is a large seabed of oil and gas. It's owned by us. The highest priority is the environment, even 50 miles from shore, or 75, because we have set a moratorium on that. And I say that should be lifted unless you can prove that the environmental damage, which I believe is zero, is of a higher priority than producing energy for the American people, for the families of America. If the world knew we were going to do that, it would have a big impact on the price of oil. Not waiting till we produced it. It would have an impact right now. If we said America needs the offshore oil and gas far greater than the environmental problem which does not exist. We don't spill oil anymore when we do oil and gas out in the sea 50 or 75 miles. So what is the priority for a moratorium? There is none. But American people are paying too much for gasoline, and part of it is because the world does not think we will produce any. And we can go on beyond the offshore. You can talk about the world's largest inventory of oil is in the state of Utah and Colorado, tied up in oil shale. The highest priority should be to produce it. It is producible, convertible to oil, just as Canada did with tar sands. The highest priority should not be in the environment. It should be mine it and mill it with no environmental degradation, but do it. The highest priority is to do it. And I think unless and until the people understand that, we will not be squaring with them as to what our share of their problem is. By not doing this, we share in their problem of high prices. Until we do it, we are part of the reason for the high prices. So that's, if you wanted an opening statement, I'm not going to give you the one I had prepared. I will save it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, as always, for your input. Senator Cornyn.
Well, Senator Corker, I appreciate your convening this hearing. I know Senator Alexander, your colleague from Tennessee, had a strong hand in creating this event and a previous event on clean energy independence. And I can't think of many more urgent issues that confront our country from a national security perspective, from an economic perspective, and also from an environmental perspective. I consider that we are all environmentalists in the sense that we all care about the quality of air that we breathe and the cleanliness of the water that we drink for ourselves and for our families and for children and grandchildren. But I don't believe it when people tell me that we have to choose one or the other. I believe we can produce the energy that we have here in this country. We can generate new forms of energy, renewable energy, and we can have the kind of environment and that we all want. And I'm afraid that when we come to Congress, perhaps we ought to take an oath like doctors do when they practice medicine. They take a Hippocratic oath where they pledge to first do no harm. And I worry that the legislation we're considering this week on the floor of the United States Senate, no matter how noble the intentions, I worry about not only whether it will achieve its intended results, but whether it will actually end up producing more harm than good. And I hope the witnesses, as they testify today, can help us with that issue. First of all, I'd like to know, to the extent they've had a chance to study the bill that we'll be taking up this week, if they have an opinion on how much it will actually cost. Second, I'd like to know if they have an opinion as to whether it will work. And how do you know that it's actually working or not working? How did we choose the particular targets that are in the legislation? I know Senator Obama has actually proposed a more ambitious target for the reduction of carbon and greenhouse gases. And why would you choose 80% reduction as opposed to 60%? Does it have any meaning in terms of the goals we're attempting to pursue? Is there science to justify the setting of those goals, or is this really sort of more of a political statement or just grabbing numbers out of the thin air? To the extent our witnesses can talk about the impact on the economy, obviously the family budget, as these signs indicate, is an important consideration, certainly to people listening who may be listening to this across America. And I'd also like to hear from you about the assumptions upon which this these targets have been set and this legislation has been proposed. I know that sometimes Congress can do things that has unintended results. The corn ethanol debate is one of those, using food for fuel. And I think the American people deserve to know whether the assumptions upon which this legislation is based are actually true. What is the experience in other countries like the European Union with regard to the Kyoto Protocol? Have they in fact been able to lower their greenhouse emissions by pursuing that? And what do we do with regard to global competition when some of our chief international competitors, China and India among those, whether they will play or not play in any overall solution? Mr. Chairman, let me just say in conclusion, last week I had the opportunity to meet with several of my constituents in Austin, Texas, when it was named as an American Solar City. They've set ambitious goals for the use of solar power as a component of their overall energy needs, which of course today are primarily coal-based, nuclear and renewable energy combination in order to meet the electricity needs of our booming economy in Central Texas. There's a lot that we can and we need to do, and I'm particularly glad also to see Dr. Tinker here today, who I had the pleasure of working with on the FutureGen project. We were disappointed that the FutureGen project did not come to Texas. It went to Illinois, but then the Department of Energy chose to pursue a different course. But the importance of that research remains, and particularly with regard to the carbon sequestration aspect of it. So I look forward to hearing from him and all of the other experts that we've mustered here today, and as they help us try to get answers to these questions that I think the American people deserve answers to, and make sure that we do no harm and hopefully do some good in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Alexander.
I want to welcome the witnesses. Thank you for coming. This is a forum sponsored by the Republican Conference of Senators, all 49 of us, to put on the top of the agenda the issue that is at the top of the agenda of most Americans, which is high gasoline prices, whether we're going to have enough electricity, as well as clean air, climate change, and the national security implications of dealing with all these issues. I want to thank Senator Cornyn for chairing the hearing. He's been one of our best informed senators in the conference, and thank Senator Domenici for his leadership as our senior member of the Energy Committee and principal sponsor of our More American Energy Amendment. The question that all of us got last week at home, at least I did, was what can you do now about high gasoline prices? And my answer is this. Instead of the President asking the Saudis to produce more oil, what the President should be saying to the Saudis is this. We're going to embark, starting today, on a new Manhattan Project for clean energy independence. So within 5 years, we'll want to be your friends, but we'll be well on a path to taking or leaving your oil. And to start doing that, we would enact Senator Domenici's More American Energy Amendment and do the things we know how to do. We would explore for oil and gas off our shores, give our states who want to participate 37.5% of it, put 12.5% of it in our Land and Water Conservation Fund as we did 2 years ago in the Gulf. We would begin to build 5 or 6 nuclear power plants a year, which is the only major form of new electricity generation that has no carbon, no nitrogen, no mercury, and no sulfur pollutant. And then we would take steps, working, we would hope, in a bipartisan way to do some of the things we don't yet know how to do. Number one might be to make plug-in electric vehicles commonplace. Number two, a crash program for carbon recapture so that we can use our coal safely and cleanly. Number three, a crash program to make solar power prices competitive with fossil fuels, make new buildings green buildings, to find new ways to reprocess and safely store nuclear waste. As Senator Bond suggested, more research on advanced biofuels, that is, crops that we don't eat. So I think what we're seeing this week is a very difference in agenda. In a closely divided Senate, the Democratic majority has decided that we will deal with climate change by focusing on high taxes, even higher gas prices, and no more exploration for American energy. If it were a Republican Senate, I would be making the argument in our councils that our agenda should be clean energy independence, and that we would start with more American energy. And then we would go to those other areas I suggested, carbon recapture, plug-in vehicles, solar energy, and by a crash program on that in 5 years, giving it the same attention we gave to the Manhattan Project in World War II, I'm convinced we could convince the world that we would be that independent in our energy. And from the day that began to happen, speculators would get nervous, oil-producing countries would become realistic, prices would begin to stabilize, and the American economy would go forward. So the best long-term solution to high gas prices is also the best short-term solution, and clean energy independence is a better goal for this week than higher taxes, higher prices, and no exploration.
Thank you all, and we're certainly looking forward to your testimony. And if you would begin, Dr. Resch, and then move across in the order you're in, we would greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Corker, and the rest of the Republican Senate Conference. SEIA is the National Trade Association of the solar energy industry. We represent about 600 companies in the United States that employ about 60,000 people that manufacture, install, finance, and overall develop solar energy, including photovoltaics, concentrating solar power, which are utility-scale power plants, as well as solar water heating and solar hybrid lighting. One does not need to look much beyond Washington, D.C. to understand the problem. In 2001, the cost of electricity in the District of Columbia was 7 cents a kilowatt hour. Today, it's 13 cents a kilowatt hour. That's an 85% increase in the price of electricity in just 7 years. The wholesale price for natural gas to heat our homes has also quintupled in that same time period, and as you pointed out, gasoline prices are approaching $4, and in fact, most places in D.C., they're quite a bit higher than $4. But I'm lucky because I actually work in the solar energy industry, and I convinced my wife a couple of years ago to put solar on our home. And what happened is we used incentives from the district as well as the federal tax credit to help lower the upfront cost of solar, and it provided a positive cash flow from day one. And what I mean specifically about that is my mortgage went up by $66 a month, but I'm saving $100 in electricity every month. So I've got a positive cash flow of almost $35 a month that we're putting towards kids' college savings and other things. The beautiful thing about that is I've been able to lock in my electricity rates for the next 30 years. So as the price of electricity has gone up the last couple of years, the return on my investment has continued to improve. And in fact, this solar investment has yielded a higher return for me than my 401k has for the last 2 years. And what we really want to do in the solar energy industry is give all Americans the ability to make that same investment. But the barriers towards expanding solar energy are many. And the first one is probably the most obvious, is solar is more expensive than traditional forms of electricity. But once a solar system is installed, there's no fuel or maintenance costs, and these systems operate flawlessly for decades. The problem is, right now, the market for solar is very small. Solar generates about 1/6 of 1/10 of all the electricity in this country. And the reason, in large part, is because we haven't created a market for it here in the United States. Prices have been artificially low for electricity historically, and solar has not been able to compete. The good news is the price of solar has come down about 90% in the last 25 years, but we're still more expensive. What's absolutely critical for us now is to scale up the size of manufacturing in the United States. I want to use an example just to show how this would make a difference. If Ford Motor Company, actually if General Motors, was manufacturing only 13,000 cars a year, that's the number of solar systems we installed last year. GM was only manufacturing 13,000 cars per year. That cost for every car would be hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's the problem we face today. What GM has done is they're providing a product into a market for millions of cars. So they've scaled up manufacturing and been able to drive down cost. We need to do the same thing for solar, and Congress must play a role in supporting the creation of a market for solar energy. And the best way is to extend and expand the investment tax credits for solar energy. In fact, I want to recognize Senator Alexander, who was SEIA's first solar champion in 2005, and his leadership role that he took on the 2005 energy bill for ensuring that the investment tax credits for solar were part of that. And the good news is those tax credits, Senator, have worked. And in the last 2 years, solar has become an economic engine in this country. We've seen the solar industry grow in the last 2 years by 71%. We've attracted $10 billion in economic investment, and we've expanded manufacturing by 74%. All in all, we've created over 6,000 jobs just in 2007 alone. We installed 254 megawatts this last year, including the first new utility-scale concentrating solar power project in Nevada. The good news is, because we've created all of that, we've got a long pipeline of new projects that are coming down the line. There's 4,000 megawatts of new concentrating solar power projects that are all under development. All of this is due to the investment tax credit created by the 109th Congress. The problem, though, is this tax credit expires in December, and we're already starting to see job losses. We're seeing sales drop off, projects drop off. And unfortunately, not extending the investment tax credit for 8 years will result in a massive tax increase on the solar energy industry, placing tens of thousands of American jobs and billions of economic investment at risk. According to Navigant Consulting, over 40,000 jobs in the solar industry and $9 billion in U.S. investment will be lost in 2009 alone if the ITC is not extended. We are going to go from being an economic engine to being yet another industry on the unemployment lines looking for help. And not one of those 4,000 megawatts of new concentrating solar power projects that I just mentioned will be built. Specifically, what do we need? Well, we need to extend the commercial tax credit for 8 additional years. We need to allow utilities to be able to use the tax credit, and we need to provide AMT relief. We also need to look at solar as a residential option and extend the residential tax credit for 8 additional years to remove the $2,000 cap and to provide AMT relief. The good news about these provisions is, one, they don't cost much, and they're good, smart policy for the country. It allows Americans to become energy patriots, and we're seeing huge industry support that have come out in favor of this, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Edison Electric Institute, the National Association of Manufacturers, the Real Estate Roundtable, the home builders. The list goes on from Walmart and Google and others who are installing solar. And we estimate at the end of 8 years, if this tax credit is extended for 8 years, solar will be providing 50% of all new electricity generation at that point in time. So within 8 years, solar will ramp up to provide half of all the new demand for electricity in this country. It's pretty spectacular. Problem, though, right now we're getting our butts kicked by Germany, Japan, and China. This is a classic story with the United States investing in the technology. We developed it, and it's being commercialized by the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Germans. The Germans, and you can see from this map here, they have a fraction of the sunlight. The darker the color on this map, the greater the solar insolation is called that we have. As you can see, Germany, they've got a fraction of the sunlight, yet they're installing 8 times as much solar each year as we do in the entire United States. In the last 5 years, they've created 150,000 jobs, and they did this all during one of the worst economic downturns since World War II. If Germany can do it, then we certainly can do it. You know what they did? They put in place an incentive that lasted 20 years. It was long enough so that people were going to build factories, they were going to make investment, in the long run be able to justify their capital investment. And the great news here is we can very easily reverse that tide and bring these jobs here. Senator Domenici, in New Mexico, as you can see from this slide, your solar resources are 105% better than Germany. Not only that, but you've got 150 solar manufacturers, installers, distributors, and developers in your state, and in fact, SCHOTT Solar recently broke ground in Albuquerque, New Mexico, on one of the biggest solar facilities, manufacturing facilities in the country. 350 new jobs, $1 billion coming to New Mexico. Absolutely spectacular. In Utah, Senator Bennett, you have solar resources that are 90% better than Germany. You've got 50 solar manufacturers and new CSP plants being developed in Utah. Tennessee, perhaps more than any other state, is going to benefit from a long-term extension of the tax credits. Your solar resources are 55% better than Germany. You've got 4 of these solar manufacturers, but you've already got Sharp Electronics. You've got Asahi Float Glass. You've got many, many companies coming out of both the university system as well as the national lab system that you should be proud of and will develop here in the United States if we extend these tax credits. Senator Bond, in Missouri, MEMC, one of the biggest producers of polysilicon in the world, their largest customer today is not the chip industry, it's the solar industry, and they're expanding their plant capacities in order to meet the solar industry. In fact, look at your resources here, 60% better than Germany. You should be installing solar on your home, Senator Bond. It's a great opportunity to save money. And Senator Cornine, as you pointed out in Texas, you have 3 cities that are part of the Solar America initiative as model cities, including Austin, including Houston and San Antonio. Heliovolt in Austin, Texas has just opened up a new plant that will employ hundreds of people, and as you can see, you have world-class solar resources. It's the only way to describe it in Texas. And the list goes on and on. The bottom line is solar will lower the cost to consumers if we scale up manufacturing and we scale up the market. And we have a choice. We can either embrace solar today and create hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs in the United States, or we can wait a few years and buy our solar panels from China and Germany. Now is the time to act, and I'm calling on you all to find a bipartisan, bicameral solution to ensure that the U.S. does not lose our global competitiveness in the next great high-tech growth industry, which is solar energy. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have later.
Thank you for your testimony, Dr. Tiller.
Chairman Corker, Senator Alexander, and members of the conference, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk to you. Advanced conversion of sustainably produced biomass is our nation's most viable near-term renewable option for producing liquid transportation fuels, holding tremendous potential to loosen, if not totally break, the stranglehold of foreign oil. Recent advances in the readiness of cellulosic ethanol technology are allowing us to step up beyond the challenges and limits we face today with increased use of food and feed crops as a source of energy. Next-generation biofuel technologies are here today, but they are immature and unproven commercially. How can this nascent industry emerge from the current pilot and demonstration phase to achieve commercial-scale quantities? More importantly, biofuels, even next-generation advanced biofuels, is something that we can do right or we can do wrong. How do we ensure that we achieve the profound positive effects while minimizing and managing risks? As we ramp up from an infant industry to a mature, sustainable industry, a number of elements must move up that ramp in parallel. One of the interesting challenges to jump-starting a commercially viable, non-food advanced biofuels industry is the chicken and egg problems tying the production of feedstock to the capital-intensive biorefinery. Using switchgrass as an example, today it costs a Tennessee producer about $300 an acre to get switchgrass established, yet it takes 3 annual growing seasons for that stand to reach full production potential. We estimate that it will require at least 50,000 acres to support a commercial biorefinery with switchgrass. In Tennessee, that probably represents at least 500 farmers making a commitment to invest in a perennial crop for 3 years before maturity is reached and the financial payoffs are achieved. On the other side, the commercial biorefinery, likely to have capital costs in excess of $200 million, is not likely to be able to obtain financing without a demonstration that sufficient quantities of sustainable biomass will be available at startup. Working on both the chicken and the egg at the same time, Tennessee has made an unparalleled commitment to lead the transition to smart, sustainable growth of this industry, spanning the breadth of farm fields to filling stations. In 2007, Tennessee Governor Bredesen committed more than $70 million to the Tennessee Biofuels Initiative, a commitment the state has not only maintained, but strengthened by leveraging nearly $250 million related to advancing sustainable biofuels through programs at the University of Tennessee and the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. The Tennessee Biofuels Initiative takes a farm-centric approach to feedstock development, working with local farmers to develop a program that provides direct payments to farmers for switchgrass production, as well as one-on-one technical assistance through the Ag Extension Service and wide-ranging research related to all aspects of the feedstock supply chain. The Tennessee Project also addresses other key challenges for large-scale commercialization through construction and operation of a 10% scale biorefinery that allows us to demonstrate and improve conversion technologies and provide assurances to financial markets evaluating risks of investing hundreds of millions of dollars in new biorefinery projects. While our initial focus is on fuel ethanol, the biorefinery also provides important long-term research capacity for co-production of clean, renewable chemicals, products, and power. Still other challenges relate to closing the loop between industrial-scale biofuel supply and consumer demands and providing region-specific solutions for the field to fill up path, allowing more flexible and sustainable utilization of land and other natural resources. All the building blocks are primed. They just need to be assembled to simultaneously address technical and economic challenges in feedstock supply, biorefining, and distribution and use. Opportunities to have a profound effect on accelerating smart commercialization include more funding for basic research, development, and demonstration of regionally appropriate and sustainable energy crops. More incentives for farmers to bring non-food acreage into sustainable energy crop production, sharing the risks of early private financial investments in commercial scale production, and more funding for science and technology R&D, including co-products. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today. This forum is a strong statement about your commitment to finding energy solutions for America, recognizing that a variety of complementary approaches and technologies can all contribute to meeting more of our energy needs from clean, renewable, domestic sources, and advanced biofuels have an important role to play in achieving these objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the testimony. We welcome Senator Sessions to our meeting, and Dr. Tinker, if you would proceed.
Mr. Chairman and members, I appreciate the opportunity to be here before you today. I'm Scott Tinker. I was born into the energy industry and worked in it about 18 years myself. I found way too much water and not enough oil, so I'm now at the university, poisoning young minds, hopefully to do better than I did. But we academics get a little insecure without a lot of titles, so those are before you in my written testimony. I won't bore you with them today. I would like to show you some pictures, and you have a packet before you that has 10 pictures. Each one's worth 1,000 words, so I don't have to say 10,000 words. We'll start with the first slide. It's important to look at the energy mix in the U.S. today. It can be divided into 3 sectors. Number 1, transportation, dominated by oil, represents 30%. The second sector is heat, and again, you get a little better mix there, oil, natural gas, and some biomass. I'll wait for you. Yep. And they're numbered 1 through 10. Okay. And the third sector, of course, is electricity, and that has the most fuel diversity. Coal dominates, with nuclear, uranium next, natural gas, hydro, and then renewables there in the electric sector. And that's about 40%, but it's growing. Power is the fastest growing sector of energy consumption as an end use in the U.S. and, in fact, the world. Today, we import 1/3 of our energy. Largely is oil. 20% of our natural gas is imported as well. So when we import 1/3 of something and depend on that, energy independence is a real challenge, and I think we need to be realistic about that. The second slide shows you that actually the rest of the world isn't much different. Every geopolitical sector in the world depends upon fossil fuels today. Black is coal, green is oil, and red is natural gas. White is nuclear, and blue are everything else together. And they varied by region. Some are dominated by coal. Asia, particularly important, which produces a lot of power from coal. In the Middle East, dominantly oil and natural gas, etc. Europe is 75%. They're the lowest of the fossil fuels. The world average is 87%, though, of fossil fuel for energy production. Slide 3 ties the strong link between...
Here. Doctor, help me understand what's the difference between Europe and Eurasia. Where do you draw the geographic lines?
Yeah, Eurasia would be all of Asia that's sort of east of Western Europe. So it would be the Eastern European countries and China.
So China
parts
is,
of China.
China is Eurasia?
And China is Asia up until China. So it'd be basically the Soviet.
So India is Eurasia?
Correct.
And what about Australia?
Australia is in Oceania, Asia and Oceania. It's in there with China.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. The third slide shows that a link between the U.S. economy and oil price here, which is a proxy for energy. This is normalized oil price, but you can see each of the three recessions in the last almost 40 years was preceded by a spike in the price of oil. We've had a large spike in that price of oil today, and we can debate whether or not we're coming into that recession. But I think it leads to 3 points, again, that are important. That we import a third of our energy. Fossil fuels represent 85% of the mix, and healthy economies require stable, affordable energy, as you all have well said at the beginning of your intros. And the transportation depends on oil, so this is going to take time to transition. Slide 4 shows that in 1980, fossil energy represented 91% of the energy in the world. And that's on the left there, with oil being the dominant. And in fact, the interesting peak in oil happened in 1979. That's when the world consumed the most oil as a percentage of energy, just under 50%. It's down well below 40% today and has been declining steadily since that time as a percentage of energy. The energy mix is different than it was 28 years ago. There's less oil, there's more natural gas, and in fact there's more coal. As we move forward, global demand is going to increase with growing populations. If we can put certain efficiency measures in place, that could be as low as about 1.25% a year, but that would be with reasonably aggressive energy efficiencies in that. So my forecasts in the lower slide are shown with a 1.25% annual growth in energy. The greatest growth comes from the non-fossil sources, including nuclear, wind, solar, geothermal, and perhaps biomass. But you can see, even with a decreasing percentage of oil steadily from today to 2030, you still maintain an energy or an oil plateau because of the growing demand. So we're looking at about 20 to 30 years of oil plateauing at today's production rates or slightly higher, coal growing, natural gas growing, and then nuclear and the renewables more steeply in percentage terms. Those in 4B have to sum to 100%. So a grand challenge, if we go to slide 5, if we look at our electricity sector, which does have flexible options, and I won't go through each of those, but each one has challenges. No energy comes without a cost. A grand challenge really is one about storage and transmission of electricity. If we could store electricity more efficiently than we do today and transmit it with less loss, many of these power options would become viable. And at that point, the markets can compete. So rather than pick a sector, if we attack the grand challenge of power storage and transmission, then we do what we do well in this country and let competition take over. Slide 6 looks at global emissions. I'll be brief on that, but it's important to point out that every sector is growing today in CO2 emissions. Asia and Oceania are growing a lot more steeply than the rest. I've been to China, and they're building, as you all know, a new power plant on an order of a week to a week and a half with pulverized coal. And they're importing all sorts of other energies as well. But coal is a very massive resource in China, and it's being chosen right now for power. Slide 7. On sequestration, what is it? Capture and storage of carbon emissions. You can put it in plants, you can put it in the oceans, or you can put it in the rocks, the fluids in the rocks. Geologic sequestration is one of the prime areas now for storing CO2, and I'll be happy to talk to that, I think, in Q&A. The point here is twofold with the next two slides. We put CO2 into the ground right now for enhanced oil recovery. We've been doing that for 30 years. We're the world leaders. It's not intended to store it. It's intended to make more oil. But it does store some of it. What it does do well is build surface infrastructure. And that's $1 million a mile for a CO2 pipeline. Compression is just as expensive as our drilling wells. So we use slide 9, the infrastructure from the oil and gas business, to do the enhanced oil recovery on the surface and pays for a lot of that infrastructure. It leads. And then that same infrastructure can be used to deliver CO2 in new wells and drill it and put it into CO2 brines. We call that brine reservoirs. The great volume is in the salt water and between the little pores, but the EOR can lead, and that's a real neat industrial government partnership. The last slide shows you where the potential is for storing CO2, and at the end of the day, we've got to put CO2 somewhere. The best place, again, is in the rocks, and everything that's dark blue there has thick stacks of sediments that can hold CO2. It also shows the oil fields and the coal. So where those things all come together are the best place for storage. The Gulf of Mexico is a great one, as are parts of the central U.S. and the Rocky Mountain basins. So large volume storage potential. Final thoughts, fossil fuels are distributed around the globe. They're a critical part. They're 87% today and decreasing slowly. We're going to build a bridge to non-fossil energy. It's going to be built with fossil fuels. If we abandon those, there's lots of risk. And global interdependence really of commodities and economies and financial markets and food is important. It's led to a lot of good things in the world, and I think energy interdependence is a pretty important concept that we need to consider as we consider our own independence in the future. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that testimony, Doctor.
Chairman Corker and Senators, thank you for inviting me to be here today. The Energy Information Administration is the independent statistical and analytical agency within the Department of Energy. We provide energy information to inform policymakers, the public, and our academic colleagues as well, and to promote efficient markets, but we do not formulate, advocate, or promote specific energy policies, and our views shouldn't be construed as representing those of the Department or the administration. As requested, I will briefly discuss current federal support and subsidies in energy markets and the prospects for clean electricity sources, drawing on several recent EIA reports. EIA recently issued a report at the request of Senator Alexander that examines federal energy-specific support and subsidies with identifiable budget impacts. Some of the main conclusions are as follows. Federal energy-specific subsidies and support more than doubled to $16.6 billion in real 2007 dollars between 1999, which was the last time we looked at this issue, and 2007. While energy-specific subsidies and support doubled since 1999, domestic energy production was virtually unchanged. Tax expenditures have emerged as the primary mechanism for providing energy-specific subsidies and support, tripling since 1999 from $3.2 billion to $10.4 billion in 2007. And those are both in 2007 dollars. Estimated subsidies and support for electricity production, which was one of the focuses of the report Senator Alexander asked for, total $6.7 billion, with an additional $9.8 billion in subsidies for end uses and ethanol and other biofuels. I've provided two tables from our report that present summary information on federal support and subsidies for energy in 2007. The first table looks at the 41% of subsidies and support directed to electricity production. It shows that refined coal received the most subsidy dollars and the biggest subsidy per unit of generation in 2007, although I believe that program is scheduled to expire. Nuclear, coal, and wind were second through fourth, respectively, in terms of total subsidy and support dollars. But coal and nuclear, which together account for about 70% of total U.S. generation, are toward the bottom of the list in terms of subsidies and support received per unit of generation. So the table provides information both on the absolute dollar amount and the amount received per unit of generation. And you get different views when you look at those two ways. So wind and solar, which were further down the list, did receive, in terms of absolute subsidies and support, did receive substantial subsidies and support per unit of generation. Of the 59% of energy-related subsidies that were directed at end-use applications and fuel consumed outside the electric power sector, the second table shows that ethanol and other biofuels received the most subsidy and support dollars in absolute terms and also in per unit terms in 2007. Oil and natural gas were second in terms of subsidy and support dollars, but were at the bottom of the list in terms of subsidies per unit of energy consumption, as they provided more than 55% of the total energy used in the United States. Turning to energy technologies, there was a wide variety of views regarding which electric generating technologies should be identified as clean, and EIA does not categorize technologies in this manner. For purposes of today's discussion, I will focus on a broad group of technologies that includes hydropower, non-hydropower renewable energy sources, nuclear, and coal with carbon capture and sequestration. In 2007, hydropower accounted for 6% of total generation and 71% of all renewable generation. No new large-scale hydropower projects have been built in recent years, and we do not anticipate any such additions before 2030. There are some opportunities for upgrades at existing hydropower facilities, but also some prospect for capacity reductions as existing facilities come up for relicensing. In 2007, non-hydropower renewables accounted for only 2.5% of total generation, but relatively rapid growth is projected to 2020, driven by state renewable portfolio standard requirements. Growth would be even more rapid with the extension of the renewable production tax credit that's currently scheduled to expire at the end of 2008, which is not assumed in our reference case, or by significant action to limit greenhouse gas emissions, which would penalize fossil fuel generation. Nuclear is an important baseload generation technology that today provides roughly 20% of the nation's electricity. With the enactment of the Energy Policy Act of 2005 and rising fossil fuel prices, our reference case includes about 17 gigawatts of new nuclear plants by 2030. Cost is definitely a key concern, and recent reports indicate that the capital cost for nuclear plants, as well as many other types of major energy infrastructure projects, is rising. As recently as 3 years ago, the nuclear industry criticized EIA because they felt we were grossly overstating nuclear plant costs. Having raised our cost estimates since that time, we're now criticized for grossly understating costs. We know that today's costs are high, but the key question is the extent to which current costs reflect a permanent shift or a temporary bubble. Significant action to limit greenhouse gas emissions would greatly increase the attractiveness of nuclear power, a demonstrated carbon-free alternative to fossil fuel generation that is particularly attractive for baseload requirements. Turning last to coal with carbon capture and sequestration, this has yet to be demonstrated on a commercial scale. Its potential competitiveness with conventional coal technology is tied to enactment of policies that place an explicit or implicit value on carbon dioxide emissions. If the technology is demonstrated and legal and physical infrastructure for transport and sequestration of captured emissions is established, coal with CCS must also compete with other low and no carbon generation options, including nuclear power and renewables. As in the case of nuclear power, costs will also be an important issue for coal with carbon capture and sequestration. Thank you for your attention. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Well, thank you for the outstanding testimony we've had from 4 doctors who've done a great job educating us, and now we truly have a witness.
Today they're about 800%, and it will be rapidly increasing after that. These are astounding numbers when you think of what that's going to mean in terms of the demands for future energy requirements. And when we think about those, whether it's a challenge in terms of energy supply, availability, sustainable growth, or greenhouse gas and climate change, these are absolutely enormous challenges, but they also represent opportunities. And to address these, GM has adopted an advanced technology strategy that seeks not only to improve fuel economy, but also to reduce greenhouse gases and displace petroleum with a range of energy sources. And so the centerpiece of our strategy is really energy diversification. Today, 97% of the transportation sector is dependent on petroleum. And what we're adopting is a technology approach that will enable the greater use of biofuels, electricity, and hydrogen to fuel the transportation sector. And this is really where gas prices come in, because gas prices are not only a function of supply and demand, but also the fact that in the transportation sector, petroleum has almost no competition today. And we all know what happens in markets when there's no competition. So by adopting a strategy to address energy security and climate change that's based on energy diversity, enabling these other fuels to come in, we think we can address all three of these issues: energy security, climate change, and the price of gas. So how are we doing this? Well, let me talk about those in a little more detail. And this our Chevrolet brand sums this up as our march from gas-friendly to gas-free. So we're working on the internal combustion engine with new technologies like direct injection, cylinder deactivation, 6-speed transmissions, advanced diesels, homogeneous charge, compression ignition that allows a gasoline engine to operate like a diesel with about 15% improvement of fuel economy. So there's work yet to be done on today's internal combustion engine and the traditional drivetrain. We're also working on hybrids. We've been in the hybrid business now for 5 years. We started with one of the largest petroleum users, a transit bus. It's ideally situated for a hybrid drivetrain, and today we have announced over 2,700 deliveries of our GM Allison hybrid transit bus system that's already saving about 3 million gallons of fuel and reducing CO2 emissions by 30,000 metric tons to date, and they're on the road in 83 cities in the U.S. and around the world. Then what we've done is taken that hybrid system we've developed for the transit buses and downsized it. And we have today in the market, or this year in the market, we'll have 8 different hybrid models. 2 are made in Kansas City. A lot of Senator Bond's constituents are busy building our Malibu hybrid and Saturn Aura hybrid. We also have a 2-mode hybrid system that's a direct descendant of the bus system. That's built in Texas, and that's our Chevy Tahoe and Yukon. That system gets 50% better fuel economy in the city, and that's on top of a vehicle that's already a class leader, the Chevy Tahoe and Yukon. And the amazing thing is that those full-size SUVs get the same fuel economy as a 2008 Toyota Camry with a 4-cylinder engine. But the Tahoe seats 8 and can tow up to 6,200 pounds. We're also downsizing that system still further for our 2009 Saturn Vue Green Line for an estimated 50% increase in overall fuel economy. So 8 hybrids in the market this year. We'll have about 16 hybrids in the market within about another 3 years. We've also announced intention to build a plug-in version of the Saturn Vue. This is taking today's hybrid and just putting a larger battery in it. It'll be our first foray into lithium-ion batteries. It will get about 10 miles of electric-only range and provide an overall increase of about doubling the fuel economy of the vehicle and be the highest most fuel-efficient SUV on the market when it's out. But a lot of the public attention is focused on the Chevy Volt. And the Chevy Volt is a new architecture, a new design architecture that we called E-Flex. It's an electric vehicle. The only thing driving the wheels is an electric motor. That electric motor gets its power from a large lithium-ion battery pack initially, and when that battery pack is depleted, there's a small internal combustion engine that is not connected to the wheels but spins a generator to provide additional electricity for additional range. In the Volt concept, it gets about 40 miles range based on stored electricity, and then about 400 miles range using gasoline or ethanol to power the internal combustion engine and extend the range. But that's only one manifestation of this E-Flex architecture. Because if you can use an internal combustion engine to drive a generator to extend the range, you can use a diesel engine or biodiesel engine to drive the generator to extend the range, or you can use a fuel cell powered by hydrogen to provide the electricity to extend the range. And we've begun production engineering on a fuel cell variant called the Cadillac Provoke. So while often in Washington we hear the answer is ethanol, no, it's hybrids, no, it's fuel cells, no, it's plug-in hybrids, we don't look at it that way. The Chevy Volt and E-Flex architecture combine those really into one vehicle architecture that enables all of our diverse sources of energies. Let me just talk about batteries. The key enabling technology for this is lithium-ion batteries. But there are over 25 different chemistries within lithium-ion batteries, and the batteries in your BlackBerry or consumer electronics are very different than the type of lithium-ion batteries you need in a vehicle. Our requirements are for 150,000 miles, 10 years, in a very rugged and hostile environment. We've taken delivery of our initial battery for testing. We've completed testing at the cell level. In October, we began running tests on the pack level for the Volt prototype, and just recently we've begun battery testing in mule cars, essentially test vehicles to understand the conditions in real world, the performance in real world conditions. And so we're very excited about the Volt. We think we are on track. We have not announced a production date, but Bob Lutz, our head of products, has set a personal goal of 2010 for getting the vehicle out. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention biofuels for just a moment, because as much as we're excited about electric vehicles, only 1% of the vehicles on the road today are powered by hybrid or fuel cell technology. And it's going to take a long time for those electric vehicles to really have an impact on petroleum consumption. And in the short term, we would agree with Dr. Tiller that ethanol and biofuels are really the biggest home run. And while there's a lot of debate today about today's corn ethanol and the pros and cons of that, we really think that debate misses the mark. We've invested in a cellulosic company called Coscata, which can make ethanol from just about any source of biomass, or municipal solid waste, or old tires. So there's a tremendous potential with invention to get around today's debate. And we've also invested in a second company called Mascoma, which has a different second-generation ethanol property. So taken together, we think there is a path beyond today's debate on biofuels. I'll stop there. Senator Cornyn, I'll be glad to answer your questions about some of the climate change legislation that's on the floor during Q&A.
Thank you all for some outstanding testimony, and we very much appreciate you coming in today. I know each of the senators will have questions, and we'll start with Senator Bennett, and stick to about 5-minute rounds if that works for everybody, and certainly do what you feel is best.
Thank you very much. I have questions for all of you. I enjoyed hearing from all of you. Quickly, Dr. Tinker, on your chart number 1, can you, if you can't do it here, furnish us with information breaking the transportation section down into airplanes, trucks, cars, and buses?
In terms of percentages?
Yeah.
Sure, I can provide that. I can't do it off the top of my head, but...
Yeah. The reason I ask that is that many of my constituents responding to the way this issue is covered in the media assume that all of our global warming problems come from SUVs produced by Mr. Cole.
Yeah.
And they say, well, if we just get the price up high enough, Americans will stop driving so much and global warming will go away. The airlines beg to differ, and so do the trucks in the ways that Senator Bond talked about. And it would be helpful if we could break that sector down in that fashion.
Turns out about 5% of the CO2 emissions come from seagoing ships because they burn such low-quality fuels. And that's one we don't even have on the planes, trains, and automobiles list.
Okay, well, if you could put that in, that would be helpful. Yeah, do you have the military in here as well?
Not as a sector. They're in the transportation sector.
The military is very much in the transportation business.
Oh, yeah.
with both airplanes and seagoing ships, and a lot of very big vehicles produced by Mr. Cole. So whatever sophistication and granulation you could give us, we would appreciate that. All right, Dr. Rush, and if you would go to the slide provided by Dr. Tinker. You made a statement that doesn't show up in his projections, and let's see if we can get the two of you to reconcile this. You said solar would produce 50% of all new electricity?
That's correct.
And he's got an upward trend line for biomass, geothermal, solar, and wind. And I'm assuming solar would be only a portion of that. And that upward trend line isn't anywhere near 50% of all new electricity, as I read it.
A couple of things on this slide. This is certainly global energy consumption. This first point, my reference was just to the United States. It would be 50% of all new demand, so it's incremental as opposed to total. What this slide shows is total demand. And so what we need to look at is between 2008 today and 2015, how much more electricity are we going to require to meet our demand? And the Energy and Information Administration estimates it's about a 1.5% increase in electricity demand each year between now and 2015, or actually goes out to 2030, I think, Howard. And so when you look out about 10 years, you're looking at about a 15% increase in total U.S.
You think
demand.
you could provide 7.5% of the increase in demand in the United States?
That's correct, Senator. The U.S.
You're providing less than 1% now, so that would be a very huge, huge increase.
That's correct, Senator. And what we're talking about is 3 different technologies: utility scale, concentrating solar power plants, in which the U.S. has the best solar resources of any developed country in the world. You're looking at 6 big states where you can put utility scale power plants, and then you're talking about rooftops around the entire United States.
Yeah, but it takes an awful lot in a 7-year period to get people to retrofit their homes. Given the inventory of homes we have right now at the upper level, upper scale in terms of the subprime crisis, there are not a whole lot of those going to be built for a while until we sell off that inventory and get back into that business. I'd like to see the details of how you get from here to there.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to provide that in written after that. But the one point I would like to make is that, if you provide a long enough incentive, the scale of manufacturing will really increase and the cost will come down. Solar will be the lowest cost option for retail electricity at that point, meaning simply it makes good economic sense. People are going to turn to solar because it is lower than going to their utility.
Yeah,
Augment it a little bit.
I'd like to see your projections on that.
Straight from the Department of Energy.
Dr. Tiller, you talk about farms, switchgrass farms. One of the challenges we're facing right now worldwide is farmers diverting land from crops that people eat to crops that people drive. And we've held hearings where some of the farmers have gotten quite defensive on this issue and saying, well, it's not our fault. But one of the major problems we have in the world right now is that the poorer nations are being, the price of food is increasing starvation everywhere, and at least the World Bank, I'm not a big fan of the World Bank, but nonetheless, their economists and others all agree that the diversion of cropland from foodstuffs to a form of biomass is at least partially responsible for this increase. I've always thought of switchgrass as something that's on the national grasslands, where all we need to do is mow it. And this is the first time I've realized you're talking about planting it and nurturing it for a 3-year period and then harvesting it just like you would any other crop. And that, at least psychologically, makes it a whole lot less attractive to me than the idea of just putting some giant combines out there on the national grasslands and let nature take its course and keep reseeding the thing. And we just mow it every so often. So talk to me about the diversion of arable land for, I'm one of those who voted against the corn ethanol thing, which proves I'm never going to run for president because I couldn't carry Iowa. But the switchgrass thing I always thought was a really good idea, paradoxically, until I heard you talk about it in these terms. So help me out on this.
Okay. There are two things that I think are very important. One is that the switchgrass production we're talking about is not directly competing with prime corn, cotton, soybean, other major crop and commodity farmland. So this is fairly marginal lands. That's one of the very strong benefits of switchgrass, is that it's very productive, high biomass yields on more marginal cropland and some underutilized land. It actually has been used for years, as you mentioned, in the grasslands for conservation type plantings. It produces a lot of biomass very, very quickly, is with very little use of fertilizer, other chemicals, not irrigated. So a lot of benefits in terms of the productive capacity of switchgrass on marginal lands. So this is not in direct competition. The other thing that's different about the switchgrass we're talking about is the yield potential for some of these varieties that are focused on energy crop feedstock production as opposed to some of the native grasses. The yields that we're getting in our mature switchgrass are in the neighborhood of 8 to 10, 6, 8, 10 tons per acre, which is a tremendous amount of biomass that compares to an average hay yield in our area of 1 to 2 tons per acre. So this is very productive land, and once it's mature as a perennial, it continues to produce that significant biomass year after year.
Thank you, Senator. Great questions, great answers. Senator Domenici.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I wanted to say to all of you, I guess it's that there's no end to the problems we have in energy, because every time I hear a panel, I'm more enthused about what we should have done or what we could do. And when you all leave us, we get back into a quagmire up here, stuck in the mud, bound by our rules and our processes. We just can't seem to break loose. But let me start. On solar, when you talked about the tax credits, you used the word it's very cheap. Tell us, for the record, the tax credits that you described will cost how much and over what period of time?
The Joint Committee on Taxation revenue estimate, which includes solar, fuel cells, and a few other technologies, so it's not a pure solar play, is about $1.7 billion over 10 years, so an average of $170 million over each year.
Very good. Now, Dr. Tinker, you said one of our big problems is power storage. Did you not? Who's leading the research parade in power storage?
I have to ask some of my colleagues.
You don't know that?
Well, but I think the breakthroughs will come probably with some of the nanotechnology research that's going on at Rice and other places.
Well, I recall that about 30 years ago, a big project was put into Los Alamos National Laboratory on power storage, and then it disappeared from the horizon. Does anybody know, is there a national laboratory involved in power storage research? No? Okay. Let me ask you, Dr. Tinker, are you somewhat of an expert in the overall supply demand on crude oil in America and in the world? That's one of your expertise?
Yes, I'm the president of the AAPG this year.
Great.
So
let me ask
I have some expertise. I wouldn't call myself an expert.
Well, I'm not that sharp, so don't worry. I won't ask you too much. Look, I'm thinking about our neighbor Canada.
Yeah.
Canada went from a totally dependent country, not even on the list of countries with heavy reserves, to second in the world in terms of crude oil reserves, all because they developed the technology for tar sands, proved it up, and they started producing it. And then they looked at how much tar sands you have, can it be recovered, and they became a giant. In fact, we import more oil from them than we do anybody else. Mm-hmm. Now, was that a good idea on their part?
That's a complex question, but I think the answer is the reserves are real. Producing them is going to take a lot of energy and water. It's essentially an energy conversion project, converting methane to oil. I think it's made economic sense for the country.
Well, it must have made economic sense. I don't know if the ratio was 2 to 1 or 2.5 to 1, something like that, maybe 3 to 1, power in versus power out.
Yeah, that might be optimistic, but it's still, the liquid BTU has more value than the methane BTU. But
no.
If you're asking, does it make sense to produce your own reserves, I guess, and you're asking for my opinion on that,
yes.
I think it does.
Yes. Look, it seems to me that the United States, that right now we legislators are really hung up because the people are asking us about the price of gasoline. Mm-hmm. At the same time, the advertisement campaign is telling us that we must proceed with major climate change solutions, and sometimes the solutions conflict with production of energy. For instance, we could produce diesel rather quickly for the military, if nothing else, from coal conversion to liquid.
Yep.
But in the process, we have not found a way to take out the carbon. But we would be burning crude oil bought from someplace in the world in those military trucks if we didn't use the diesel or petroleum produced from coal liquefaction. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm wondering, as one who can see the big picture, would it not be better for America to proceed with some of these technologies that are just around the corner, like coal gasification, and produce liquid from coal, which is in abundance, rather than say, until you have that perfected, which we don't know how long that would take in terms of the removal of carbon dioxide. Could you just give me your feel for that? I have that question right. It's going to be presented because I'm arguing that we should produce our own quickly.
Well, Fischer-Tropsch processes for conversion of coal to liquids and then it actually goes through a natural gas, a syngas, and then to a liquid, have been around for 50 years. And the carbon capture part of that technology actually exists today. Going to scale with it is a challenge. The main challenge is what you do with the carbon dioxide. And we are studying CO2 sequestration in the U.S. now, and the world is as well. It's large volumes. We produce 7 billion tons a year of CO2 in the U.S., man-made. And so the real challenge there is, in part, geologic. Can we put that much CO2 away? I think we can. But the bigger challenges there are regulatory.
It's what?
Regulatory, permitting, and legal.
Yes, of course. We have to say it's important. We haven't said it's important so that anybody can delay it and stop it and nothing happens.
But you could do that. You could liquefy coal. And,
and it seems to me that the answer that we're producing carbon dioxide are the question, and so we shouldn't do it. That's not a good answer for us because the reason that the price of gasoline is so high is because we have to import it all. We would be producing a substitute, so the ratio would be 1 to 1 to the extent that we burned that diesel instead of diesel that came from oil. The same carbon dioxide would occur because we didn't stop using it, right? So I'm only talking about substituting when I'm talking. And my last question has to do with are we Republicans who seem to be saying we should proceed with producing wherever we have the production potential? We ought to produce it unless that causes serious damage to something else, because America being able to produce a lot of oil and gas on its own, say all our coastal areas were void of the moratoria, and you know that we could be busy for 10 years producing all we could get our hands on. That would be a big chunk. Is something like that, which we said we would do, which we know how to do, which the reserves are there, is that foolhardy because the problem is too big, or it only solves a temporal part of the issue, part of the time? Here's how I look at it. If we produce it for the next 15 years, unless we were not going to be using that much crude oil during that time, it's all to America's benefit to do that. Am I on the right track?
Again, I think you are. I think that you have to build a bridge to the non-fossil future, and that oil and gas and coal are that bridge. Absolutely. And so I don't say that you're going to turn the production declines in this country around, but you'll certainly build a longer bridge. And I think you mentioned in your opening statements the environmental component. Those have gotten much, much better, to the point where there were no major disasters at all after Katrina and Rita in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes.
And so that's a very important point to make. The oil and gas industry has done a very good job with environmental. And so, yeah, I think it's difficult to go out to the rest of the world and say, why don't you send us more if we don't produce our own reserves?
And also, why don't you knock the price down when we are contributing to to the stretch and the push on pushing?
And I probably have a little different spin on the price, but I don't have to run for election. I actually don't think the price of gasoline is too high.
Well, I understand.
And, because I saw people stand in line in the Dallas airport this morning paying $4 for a cup of Starbucks.
I'm with you.
So,
but look, I can say to you that I can know what you just said, but I still have to solve a problem.
Understand. But one of the things that gets us there is that price. Price, just historically, it's predictable as anything. When the price goes up, we have valuable conversations about things we should do. And there's nothing that drives energy conservation and efficiency like good old-fashioned price. And so I'm pleased that we're actually having these conversations. I'm not happy that we're having to pay more for gasoline. I have 4 kids. But I think it's actually a reasonably good deal relative to this.
There's no question. Yeah. Well, there's no question, but this is this water stuff, somebody's stealing money. This is just burglary, highway thievery, water in a bottle, $2, $3, $4. Go in a Safeway store, even in a poor neighborhood, and you'll find out the water shelves are empty first. People that can hardly afford food are buying water in a metropolitan area of the United States, You think the water in the tap has a sign on it, don't drink it. It doesn't have that, And let me get one more point from my head. There is a long period of time during which the United States of America, all these wonderful things notwithstanding that we might do, we're going to need crude oil, right? A lot of it for a long time, 20 years, 30 years. It's long enough for us to invest in discovering our own, isn't it?
We'll need crude oil for many decades.
For how long?
Many decades.
For many decades.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great to have somebody so involved in energy involved in this. Senator Sessions, glad to have you here and look forward to your contribution.
Thank you. Dr. Tinker, you're not a politician. You hadn't been traveling your state and talking to your people who are now paying $50, $75, $100 a month more for the same number of gallons they were getting 2 years ago. And it may be that at the great university there, that doesn't impact your budget, but it's impacting other people's budgets, and they're not able to run right out and buy one of these new Volts or Prius or something, a hybrid automobile. And it's not good for the economy. The world price of oil is sucking a larger percentage of our wealth out of our country, $500 billion a year, and that is not good for this economy. And as your chart showed, I think it was your chart, it precipitates recessions, or appears to, at least historically. So I don't like that phrase. I've heard that say, I've heard members of the Senate privately, I don't think this, rah, rah, rah. But it is impacting us adversely. Forgive me. I can tell you enjoy this kind of debate. I wouldn't pick on you if I didn't think so. Let me ask, I'm not sure where, maybe I'll start with Mr. Cole. It seems to me, and our doctor here with the Energy Department next to you, he can't comment on policy and politics. Now, he is trapped. All he can do is produce data. But it seems to me, my colleagues, that the Department of Energy can make recommendations. If we propose a policy in the Senate that adversely impacts the Department of Defense, why they run right over and explain why this is not a good idea and why we need to spend the money this way and that way, and most of the other departments do. It seems to me there needs to be someone acutely, intensely involved reviewing the data produced within the Department of Energy, knowing there's stovepipe groups over here that favor cellulose and solar and geothermal and all this in the Department of Energy, and looking at the tax credits that we put on various things, and saying you really ought to reduce the tax credit on ethanol more, then you could take that money and you could put it on some other form of energy, and we get more bang for our buck. As a businessman, I can tell the way you analyzed the problem. You're a good businessman. Isn't that what somebody needs to be doing in this country? Helping the Congress to decide what subsidies rather than which special interest group or lobbyist is most effective.
You have lots of people in town that will try and help you decide where the money should be spent. That's not the problem. You have a lot of advice. I think it's sorting the challenges is sorting through all the conflicting advice.
Well, I'm talking about a top government official in the Department of Energy who has should be have it as goal to improving our energy and environmental policy.
Well, that is one role of the Secretary of Energy, and we work with them on a daily basis. With a variety of programs. One of the things that we've done in the transportation sector to try and get at this issue is something called the Freedom Car Partnership, which looks across today. It looks across a variety of different technologies, and the role of the private sector is to inform the Department of Energy what types of research are really solving a problem that needs to be solved, and as opposed to types of research that might be interesting. But
well, yeah, I think that's good, and I think sometimes the Department of Energy does well at that. But I'm thinking we cut, as I understand, nobody had the chance to read it, but we were told that in the Ag Bill we reduced the subsidy for ethanol from 51 to 45%. Now, I don't know, there was no hearings to my knowledge on what the proper subsidy for ethanol should be and whether we should have cut it to 30 or to 15 and taken that savings and incentivized some other energy source. Dr. Grunspecht, you're the Deputy Administrator in Energy, but in a nonpartisan, non-political position, but what do you think? Can you comment on that?
I think the department, other parts of the department, which are actively involved in these issues, and the Secretary is actively involved in these issues, do look at those questions. Again, we provide advice in response to specific queries, like the one we got from Senator Alexander, like the queries we got on the Lieberman-Warner bill, but I don't want to leave you with the impression that either EIA or the department is not very focused on these issues. We are very focused on these issues.
Well, I know you're focused on them, but I'm telling you, I'm not feeling the leadership, and never have, from Energy Department cohesively. The Secretary or somebody on that designation who's studying all this stuff can come to us and actively, effectively argue that this is better policy than that to help us make better decisions. And I would just say, Dr. Tiller, thank you. I visited the Gadsden steam plant Thursday, where her switchgrass has been consumed in Alabama, Senator Corker, and I've been a big advocate of switchgrass, and Dr. Bransby at Auburn, 10 or 12 years ago, we started examining it. It has high energy, and it can work on marginal lands. And they are, you know, their opinion is it's, with the cost of transportation and what a farmer's got to have, it's close, and it could continue to work. Did you express can you express your opinion about the economics as to how close we can get to other forms of electricity cost-wise?
Sure. One opportunity we have with biomass is that, as you mentioned, the Gadsden co-firing project for switchgrass is a form of electricity, but we also have opportunities for transportation fuels with switchgrass and other biofuels. So I think that certainly improves the economics, the fact that we can produce not only fuels but power, also some high-value chemicals and other things that right now are only available from non-renewable sources. So I think that the combination of those is very important as well.
And just briefly, but do you heat the switchgrass? Is that the way it's done now, rather than using microbes or conversion process?
Well,
is that the most efficient way now, you think, to heat it and have the gas come off?
There are two primary conversion pathways, a thermochemical and a biochemical. And the path that we are pursuing in our biofuels project is the biochemical. We think in the long run there are tremendous advantages. There are a number of short-term advantages as well with thermochemical, and I think it really depends on the particular feedstocks, and I think it will be a local solution depending on what feedstocks can economically be produced in particular areas. This is a local solution to supply a local demand in many cases.
I think it has tremendous potential that we can convert waste. There's a tremendous amount of waste wood in the forest that are left when trees are cut, in cities when they have to pay to landfill it. Tremendous amounts. You take that, your paper perhaps, waste products, as well as switchgrass type biofuels. That's quite a bit of energy there that it does appear to me from my visits this week at Auburn University and talked to some other people that it's getting close to being economical. Auburn will have here in Washington, June 19th, a portable, not an incinerator, but where you gasification unit where you put in wood chips in one end, they heat it on a trailer, and out comes the other gas, or can be converted to a liquid. That's doable now, and in commercial scale, it will be pretty competitive with $100 barrel oil.
Yes.
Thank you.
Senator, thank you, and thanks for your great answers. You know, in many ways today, we've got this perfect storm, if you will, occurring legislatively, not maybe in other ways, but there's a climate bill that begins today. We have a 5:30 vote. My guess is that overwhelmingly we will move to a debate on climate change, which I think is a good thing. And then at the same time, we have constituents all across the country that are paying $4 a gallon. And whether that's a good thing or bad thing, Dr. Tinker, certainly it's gotten people's attention. And I think that many people in our country feel very vulnerable right now as it relates to energy. And I think maybe for the first time, people are beginning to think more fully, I'm talking about the average American, about energy security. And it's my hope, and maybe I haven't been around here long enough to think that this is not possible, but it's my hope that somehow or another we'll figure out a way together to link our concerns for climate with our concerns for energy security. And I really think that that is the place that our country needs to end up being. And so I'm thrilled. I really am. I'm thrilled that we're having a debate today at 5:30, beginning hopefully for this week and maybe longer, on climate change at a time when our citizens are concerned about energy security. And I just wondered, all of you certainly are thoughtful folks who have lots of information. Some of you are, putting that to straight to use today. All of you actually, in some form or fashion, are. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about some of the alignment of interest. There's been a number of questions here today about energy security and more production and more nuclear and other kinds of things. Some of those things that are an alignment of interest, if you will, between what you're working on and concerns for the climate, and some of those things that you think just are too difficult to be worked out. Some of those, there's always a rub. Sometimes, obviously, you can't have a perfect alignment of interest, but I wonder if you might point out some of those. And I'll just start, and whoever wants to speak first, if you would, just grab the microphone.
I'll go ahead and start. I think there's there's an interesting change that's occurring in the energy industry where a lot of people said there's fossil fuels and then there's renewable energy, and that the two don't mix, or that they're oil and water and we can't put them together. And the truth is they actually complement each other extremely well. And what we see for utility scale solar power plants that are being developed today, they're baseload solar power plants. They are going to be providing electricity 24/7. They're going to be providing as much electricity as possible using the sun, and when the sun's not shining, they're going to be using natural gas as the backup. That is how we use existing technology and emerging technologies together to be carbon smart, if you will. That's how we ensure that we can site and build these new power plants near population centers that need the electricity most. This is how we ensure that we have not only, baseload power, but we have firm dispatchable peak power, which we didn't really talk about, but it's the fastest growing segment of the energy mix today. I think you combine that with some of the innovations on distributed technology, which are photovoltaics and other distributed sources, what you'll find is that those technologies actually secure the grid. There's a great study by the Department of Energy looking at what happened in the Northeast 4 summers ago or 5 summers ago when the entire grid shut down. They basically said we are at such a stress point in the electricity infrastructure that one tree branch falling down in Ohio would collapse the entire Northeast grid. The DOE looked back and said if only 0.5% of all that electricity was generated by solar or some other distributed generating technology, that would have eased off enough congestion on the grid so that we wouldn't have seen the collapse, the triggering effect throughout the entire Northeast, and it would have been an isolated blackout. That blackout cost hundreds of billions of dollars throughout the entire Northeast. Easily preventable by being smart with our grid. We can improve the grid infrastructure, provide energy security while still reducing our carbon emissions. So I think there's great opportunities. And frankly, in this country, there's no better place to do it. There's so much innovation, incredible technology development that's occurring, incredible innovations on the financing as well. Your job is almost the easy part, which is to say, here's the roadmap. Here are the rules of the game, provide them for a long enough period of time, and say, okay, entrepreneurs, go figure it out. And I guarantee America will make money and become stronger because of it.
Thank you. Kelly?
Another thing to think about along the in terms of alignment, I think, is the various constituencies that are now becoming interested in the climate change debate that have not shown as much interest in this in the past. So when we think about the opportunities for cellulosic biofuels in the engagement that we now have with farmers, with landowners, forest landowners, with rural communities, all that have opportunities to benefit from the increased economic activity and at the same time contribute positively to reducing our carbon footprint, I think that's a tremendous opportunity to align all of those interests that we haven't had engaged in the past. I think, too, as Dr. Resch was just saying, that the opportunities for distributed both production and use are good opportunities to align those localized regional solutions with opportunities to align across multiple fronts as well.
Thank you. Dr. Tinker.
I think it's a fantastic question, and so I appreciate your charging us to address that. I'm kind of an energy type agnostic, and I came out of the oil and gas business, but I'm not in that now. I think it's important for the people to recognize that sort of what the portfolio looks like today, and that we don't have an on and off switch from one to another. So, for example, the large oil and gas companies, the ones that are SEC regulated and publicly traded, the non-national oil companies, control less than 10% of the world's reserves today of oil. So they don't control much of anything, particularly the price. But there are only about 10 of those left out of the financial reporting system 25 that I've tracked for 20 years today. They've merged or gone away. And we need them. We need them to kind of provide the fuels that power our economy today as we transition across this bridge. I think it's important for the country to recognize that, because without them we'll be largely dependent on the national oil companies in the world. And so as we build that bridge, there's no doubt in my mind at some point in the future, and I may not be quite as aggressive as my colleague here, but no doubt in my mind solar will be it somewhere out there in that ultimate future. We got things to solve before we get there. So building a bridge with good foundation is critical. If we jump off too quick and lose alignment as we transition to tomorrow's cars, but the 1% is an important thing. And when you're plugging in today, even with those hybrids, you're plugging into 52% coal, 20% methane, uranium. That's what you're plugging into today. So as we go down that road, we have to be very cognizant of how that transition happens. And I think the alignment role that could be played here federally is just educating the people on what that roadmap looks like so that we're not quite as panicked about these transitions as we go forward. And the last thing I'll say is I'm actually here this week for a different reason. I'm on BP, Technical Advisory Board, a global big company. And our whole reason for being here this week is to look at alternative energies. That's a huge portfolio of that oil and gas company. And many of those oil and gas companies are true energy companies. They're looking at those alternatives and working hand in hand with partners and alignments across the whole industrial sector to try to solve these things. And we need to support that process and not make the big industries bad or good. Or I think everybody's trying to get out there and do what's right. It's complicated. It's a complicated picture. Mm-hmm. And the last thing you throw in there is water. You mentioned energy, carbon, security, carbon being climate. Water is a big piece of that integrated portfolio. There's no energy sector really that doesn't consume massive amounts of water, which is a critical resource as well. So we've got to have that in that mix.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much. Doctor?
I think that the issues you mentioned, energy security and climate change, certainly the ones that are capturing attention. There are some synergies, and I guess the thing is to focus on the synergies. We also have to recognize that there may be some conflicts. So Senator Domenici, who left, was talking about the coal to liquids, and that's clearly very good in terms of energy security, but unless you have carbon capture and sequestration, it's not particularly good in terms of greenhouse gas. Efficiency is an area where there's a lot of, I think, synergy in both of those problems, and that's pretty important. The energy security problem is mostly focused on transportation and vehicles where we use our oil. Many people, this is not just the Energy Information Administration, many people believe that the electric power sector is a sort of the initial focus of where we would try to get significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. I think there are, on the vehicle side, there are lots of chicken and egg type problems that were alluded to, I think, in the testimony of my colleague. You have to have the vehicles, you have to have the fuels distribution infrastructure for the alternative fuels. Maybe what my other colleague was talking about with respect to plug-in hybrids sort of overcomes that, because the infrastructure to plug in is in really every American garage. So, certainly I agree with my colleague that we shouldn't be putting all our eggs in one basket, and we should be pursuing a variety of fuels. But this is one of the first options that I think does rely on an existing infrastructure that's already in place, if we can come up with the battery, which is the key question, to significantly transform the transportation sector and move it away from oil. In terms of electric power sector, there are lots of options, been discussed in many hearings, but the big challenge, I think, is having the will to make the big infrastructure changes that need to be made. Some of the technologies are demonstrated already. Nuclear is providing 20% of our generation. Others, I think the cost being reduced. Solar, wind, coal with carbon capture and sequestration is one that is yet to really be demonstrated on a commercial scale. But the real question is, if we want to do these things, we're going to need to make a substantial change in our energy infrastructure, big projects, the kinds of things that we have not done over the last 20 years. So I would lay that out as a challenge. It could be a very exciting challenge. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. And Keith?
General Motors has had its share of challenges over the last 5 years, and one of the things that makes you do is kind of confront the brutal facts. And in this arena, I think that's a useful place to start. One of the brutal facts is we're going to be needing petroleum for a long time to come. And a part of that is that change takes time. One of our competitors was very successful with the Prius, and after 10 years, they sold 1 million vehicles, cumulative, after 10 years. It took them 10 years to get to 1 million vehicles. Now, what we need to do is get new technology not just up to 1 million vehicles sold cumulatively, but we need to get new technology in 16 million vehicles that are sold every year. And even when you get to that point, it takes another 10 to 15 years to change the fleet, because the fleet's out there for 10, 15 or more years. So change is going to take time. That doesn't mean that we can't get going now. And, but I think the future, this century, is going to be a more complex reality than the last one, where we basically had one dominant fuel, one dominant engine technology in the transportation sector. But that's a good thing. That's an opportunity that I think we should embrace. Having no single solution creates a competition not only amongst fuels, but amongst those different vehicle technologies. The other piece of someone mentioned that one of the central issues is storage. And if there was a way to frame kind of a grand challenge, it is energy storage, whether it's electricity and batteries, hydrogen and hydrogen storage, or other storage media. Storing energy enables so many different good outcomes that are at the convergence of both energy security and climate change. And that is, as I started my presentation, that is how we look at things, looking for those win-win solutions. And I think that the Congress should look for win-win solutions, and if there are solutions that don't advance us both in terms of reducing greenhouse gases and reducing our energy security, they should at least be part of a package that gets us to a low-carbon domestic energy future. If you look at any of the analysis on cap-and-trade programs, the things that the assumptions that drive the cost of these are overwhelmingly: are we going to build nuclear plants? Are we going to have carbon capture and storage in wide places? And another element is biofuels going to be successful in the way that we think it can be, in large scale with second-generation biofuels? So those technologies have to be on the way before we can really tackle this challenge. Now, as a company, we're part of U.S. CAP. We've embraced cap and trade as a vehicle to get there. We think the market is a powerful tool, and a market signal around carbon can stimulate those technologies without you picking a lot of winners and losers. But we don't think this bill that Congress is debating this week is one that we can embrace, because it doesn't recognize these brutal facts, that technology takes time, deployment takes time, and it's going to take time for that market to have a market signal and then get the economy to adjust to looking for those low-carbon opportunities. So while U.S. CAP and we endorse a concept of slowing, stopping, and then reversing the rate of growth in greenhouse gas emissions, an approach that immediately starts ramping them down doesn't recognize the brutal facts, doesn't give the economy and technology companies the chance to react to that market signal, and from that flow a lot of the high-cost problems that I'm sure you'll be discussing the rest of this week.
That is excellent testimony. Do you have anything you want to say?
Yeah, I just have one final comment. And Dr. Risch, it ain't easy. It really ain't easy, because I want to put it in this context. Cheap energy is the reason the Marshall Plan was able to rebuild Europe. Cheap energy is good for an economy. Cheap energy is one of the reasons we won the Cold War. Now we are facing a world where we don't have cheap energy, and in the process we are seeing enormous wealth transfer. You may think $4 a gallon makes some sense, and in a stovepipe situation compared to Starbucks, it does. But you pointed out, Dr. Tinker, only about 6% of the oil producers in this world spend the profits that they get from producing oil to search for new oil or to generate new energy. Hugo Chavez does not use his profits to explore for new oil. Hugo Chavez loves expensive energy because he uses the profits he gets from it for political purposes, and so does Vladimir Putin. And this is a major existential problem. As we see energy costs go up, we see poverty increase throughout the third world, almost on a one-to-one basis. If we're going to end poverty in Africa, we need cheap energy. I talked to the ambassador from Mexico. If we're going to keep people in Mexico from storming the gates to try to get in the United States because their economic opportunities in Mexico are such that they want to stay there, we need cheap energy. And we're not going to get it. There are all kinds of adjustments that have to be made here, and we have to understand that there are all kinds of additional consequences. Senator Domenici talked about the national labs. I was at the national labs because I'm going to take Senator Domenici's spot when he leaves as the ranking Republican on the Energy and Water Subcommittee of Appropriations. They told me there will be, no matter what we do, there will be no changes for 40 years as far as global warming is concerned. And I said, why is that? And they said, because if human beings are causing it, if it is a result of emissions that we put into the atmosphere, the emissions that we put into the atmosphere that are causing the global warming now were put there in 1960. This is a 40-year kind of cycle. So if we stop right now, it'll take another 40 years for that to work itself out, and we're not going to stop right now. 40 years in terms of the economic and geopolitical consequences of the kind of wealth transfer we're talking about, if we don't get some kind of a handle on the implication, on the power that the petrostates have around this world, are going to be very, very severe. So I applaud you all. This has been very, very helpful from all of you. But my cautionary tale to the country as a whole is that this problem of getting the energy we need to solve our economic and geopolitical problems around the world is one of the most daunting things I've ever faced since I've been involved in politics. And we're looking for you as you're looking for us. You're looking to you as you're looking to us to try to find a way out of this and find a way to keep the cost of energy available so that we can get the advantages we want, at the same time dealing with all of the other issues that you have discussed so well and so competently here today, and I thank you all for your willingness to do that.
Thank you, Senator Bennett. Senator Sessions, anything else?
No, just thank you, Senator Corker, for your leadership and the good questions and the good panel that's here. There are a lot of things I believe we can do, and we as a government through our policies can accelerate. We can't create, but we can accelerate creations and innovations into the marketplace. We can create incentives, as we did with ethanol, rightly or wrongly, but we have accelerated ethanol through much of our economy in a very short period of time. So there are other things, I think there are ways that we can be helpful in trying to get us off this foreign oil and reduce our CO2 emissions. I just truly believe this cap and trade bill is not the way to do it.
I want to thank you for your testimony. I really, I know there were 6 or 7 senators here and others who are listening in from afar, but I really do think the way each of you framed the issues and talked about where we are today will be very helpful to us. I really am hopeful personally that we'll be able to pull together sort of these two poles that are very, very apart in our country so that we can, in fact, focus on the environment but focus on the energy security that we need as a country simultaneously. And I think y'all have laid out some very interesting points of view that we might not have heard in one forum altogether. And I just want to thank you for doing that at this point in time, and hopefully we'll continue to work together towards a resolve. And again, thank you for your time. Thank you very much.